What is up, everybody? It is your boy Nick Noodles back from the dead, and today we are doing a full tutorial on how to do sole swaps on Dunks and Jordan 1s. This will work for any Dunk model. It could be a Dunk Low, Dunk High, it could be the SB versions of the Dunks, and it could also be any type of Jordan 1. The process is identical, and the goal of this video is to be all in one, everything that you would need, all the steps of the process, and we'll show you the results at the end. The shoe I'm going to be using for this video is the 2009 Varsity Red Dunks. This is the new sole that I put on it. I'm going to show you all the steps. I am actually using the sole from the 1985 acid wash Dunks that just came out this year, and this is my first time doing it, so this is going to be geared towards beginners to show that anybody can do it. In my opinion, this is definitely one of the easier sneaker customizations to do. It really just takes time and patience. It doesn't really take as much skill unless you're trying to make it look, you know, factory new. But on older pairs like this, you don't really have to be super perfect. So first thing we need to do is go over a list of everything you need, and I've written it all down. The first thing you're going to need is a donor sole, and there are multiple different ways to go about getting a donor sole. I recommend just finding the cheapest option possible. So for me, it was pretty difficult up until this year to find Dunks with a red bottom. The only option were the St. John Dunk Lows that released last year, and that's like a $300 to $400 shoe, and I didn't want to spend that much just for a donor pair. Luckily this year we got the championship red Dunks and the 1985 Dunk Highs, and I went with the 1985 version just because the soles were already yellowed. I copped for retail, but on the resale market, both of those shoes are selling pretty low. If you're going for like a Jordan replacement, look at Jordan 1 mids or lows. You should be able to find them at your local Foot Lockers. If not, they're pretty cheap on the resale market. And then if you just can't afford retail or the resale price, just get reps. They pretty much look the same, and you're not going to be able to tell a rep sole from a retail sole. So go to Rep Sneakers, check out some of the sellers like Mux, Coco, Mr. Hugh. They'll all get you right if that's what you need. Some other things that are required are an X-Acto knife, acetone and cotton swabs, contact cement, a brush if the contact cement does not have a brush built into it, a sewing awl and thread, sandpaper, and a pot that you can boil water in. Those items are required. Now let's talk about some optional items, and the first thing is a respirator. Now I highly recommend it because the fumes from the contact cement are very strong. So if you want to protect your lungs, I highly just recommend picking up a respirator. I tried using an N95 mask and that did not block out the fumes, so I highly would recommend investing the extra money into one of those. The other optional items are a Dremel, a heat gun, needle nose pliers, and a seam ripper. So those are all the items that are optional and required. Now we're ready to get started with the process. So the first step is removing the soles from your beat pair and your donor pair. So the beat soles are going to be a lot easier to remove because the glue is going to be broken down. You're likely doing this on an older pair. For me, my pair is from 2009, so the glue is pretty much already broken down. The only thing holding the upper to the sole is the thread going around the outside. There's already separation between the upper and the sole, so I can just run a X-Acto knife in between that gap all the way around, and once I cut up all that thread, I can easily just rip off the upper. Now for your donor pair, it's going to be a lot harder to remove because the glue is going to be fresh, very strong. A 5-year-old just applied it, so it's going to be a lot more difficult. Now the first thing you want to do is just take a seam ripper and snip the thread around the outside. This is optional, but it's going to be a lot easier if you do this beforehand. And we're going to be using the hot water method where you just boil water and pour it in the shoe. I'm doing it in my sink, and I recommend just doing somewhere where it'll be clean. You could do it outside, in the bathtub, wherever. And you're going to let the water sit there for about 5 minutes until it's ready to be removed. Now for your donor pair, I recommend you just completely trash it or use a donor pair that you don't care about. It's a lot easier to remove it if you don't care about how it looks. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my X-Acto knife and I'm starting to just cut away at the upper material near the top of the midsole. And this is going to allow me to just grip it a lot better and be able to just rip it out with sheer force. And you know, once you have a large enough hole cut out, you should be able to pry it off. It will be a lot harder than your beat pair. While I'm doing this, I'm running hot sink water into the midsole so that it loosens the glue even more. And you'll notice that the sides of the shoe, they may be stubborn, so we're just gonna worry about those later. Just focus on separating most of the upper from the bottom of the midsole. And then once that's completely removed and you've, run your X-Acto knife all the way around, then we can focus on the sides. And again, I'm using the same technique. I'm just running hot water in the spots that I want to remove. And this is where the pliers will come in handy. You can use the pliers to kind of just rip off the stubborn pieces. So once the soles are dried after you remove the uppers from them, you're going to want to prepare it for gluing. And this is just done by sanding it down, and you can do it with sandpaper. I like to use a sanding block on the bottom of the midsole where it's flat because I think it's just a lot easier and faster. But for the sides of the midsole, I recommend using a Dremel. It's just a lot faster. And I'm just running the Dremel around, getting rid of all those dried on glue and any remaining leather pieces. And then for the uppers, I'm just running the Dremel along that bottom edge where the glue previously was. You want to be careful not to sand away any of the thread at the bottom of the shoe. All I'm doing is just angling the Dremel and then running it along the bottom edge. Once you've done that, you're just going to want to wipe it down with some acetone and cotton swabs and then let it dry before we start the gluing process. Now it's time to glue, and again, I highly recommend wearing a respirator. You want to apply 1 to 2 layers around the entire midsole. I'm getting away with just 3 ounces of it for 1 pair of shoes. You want to apply 1 to 2 layers around the entire midsole. This includes the bottoms and the sides, and I'm just using the brush that's built into the contact cement. You can use a separate brush if you want to. So I'm applying it all over the midsole. And then for the uppers, I'm applying it on the bottom of the upper, as well as the area where we just sanded it down along the bottom edge. And if you want to be perfect, you can definitely draw lines across the bottom edge of where not to glue, but I'm not too concerned with being perfect with it. So I kind of just eyeballed it. Whatever contact cement you're using may be different from mine. Mine requires that I allow 15 minutes to 2 hours before I try and stick the 2 pieces together. So just follow the instructions. It's probably a similar wait time. So after applying the glue, I let mine sit for around 30 minutes before trying to stick them together. And this is where you're going to want to be really patient. You're going to want to make sure that everything is lined up before you attach 2 pieces together, especially if you're not using a heat gun. It will be hard to make adjustments. So what I like to do is focus on the toe box, then the heels, and then everything in between there. Starting with the toe box, I just heat that section up on both the upper and the sole. And then once it's heated up, I like to try and line them up together. As long as you take your time and you're using the right size midsole, everything should line up perfectly. Once they are attached, they should not move. So you want to wiggle it around, and if the midsole is like separating from it, you did not prep the surface right. So you might want to go and sand stuff down a little bit more or just apply more glue. If you don't line things up right, there are 2 ways to fix it. One is to just heat that section up again to loosen up the glue. Then it should separate easily. If you don't have a heat gun, you're just gonna have to rip it apart with brute force. It is gonna be pretty hard and you're likely gonna get glue everywhere, but that is really the only way to do it. So I highly recommend taking your time. Once the toe box is lined up, we're gonna do the same thing to the heel. Heat up that section or just carefully line it up. Once again, you're just gonna apply pressure once it's lined up. At this point, most of the upper should be lined up with the sides and the middle of the sole. So really, we're just gonna go around the edges and push it into place. Again, if you have to make adjustments, it's way easier with a heat gun. Now, if you have the right size midsole, everything should line up properly at this point. And really all you have to do is just go around the edges and push things together. Now, for me personally, my midsole is slightly thinner than the original pair, and this is just the way that the 1985 Dunks were made. They were slightly narrower, and this is something I didn't realize until I was at this stage of the sole swap. At this point, on some sections of the sides where they weren't lining up properly, I would heat those sections up and kind of just pinch it and move it into place. And in some places I was successful, but in other places it just wasn't possible because of how narrow the midsole was. But I'm not trying to go for a perfect sole swap here, so the results I can live with. But if your donor midsole exactly matches your original midsole, this shouldn't be an issue. Just go around the sides, push it into place, use that heat gun if you have to. The last thing I like to do is just focus on the inside of the shoe and really push down from the inside onto the sole. I like to just heat it up from the inside, but if you don't have the heat gun, some good old pressure will work. All right, so now I'm going to show you how you're going to stitch the upper onto the midsole. And to do this, I'm going to do it on the beater pair just so you can see the knots and stuff that I'm doing more clearly. And this kit I'm using from Amazon, it was like 10 bucks. Now, it's not the best quality kit. Like, I literally had to use Gorilla Glue on the tip of this to repair it. But I do like that it comes with 2 of them. This little tool right here you can use to poke the holes up ahead of time, so that it is a lot easier to thread it later, because when you're trying to sew through the midsole and the upper, it can be a little tough, but this will go through the holes pretty nicely. As you can see there, you can prep it, and then when you go in with the actual sewing awl, it should go in a lot easier if I can line it up. So let's go ahead and show you how to do this. Now, the main part of the sewing awl is this little hole at the top of the needle. I don't know if you can see that. And then on the other side, you have, it's kind of like a little groove in the needle, and basically the string is able to fit into this little groove right here. It's only on one side. So to get started, go ahead and take some of your thread. And I like this kit that I bought because it came with thread. And it is like a wax material, so it's going to prevent fraying. So I would highly recommend going with a material that is waxed. For this example, I don't need that much thread, but you want to make sure that you cut enough to go around the whole shoe. I would say take a piece of string, and if it can go around the shoe 3 or 4 times, that is more than enough. So the first thing we're going to do is take one end of your string, and you're going to want to thread it through the top of your sewing awl. It's a lot easier if it is waxed, because you're not going to have as much fraying. So with one end through, then you're going to take the sewing awl and stab it through the midsole like so. And when you pull it through, what I like to do is I like to grab the side that doesn't have the little divot in it. So that's on this side, so I'm going to grab on the right side here. And then when I pull through, this needle is just going to slide right out, and your loop is going to stay in place like that. So that's basically the motion we're going to be doing. So for starting off, go ahead, once you poke this little knot through, take the string out of the sewing awl, and now you're going to want to pull one piece all the way through. So now we have one end that's on the inside, and then we have one end that's on the outside. And you're going to want to make sure that they're about equal length. So now we're ready to actually start stitching. Now you're going to take the end that's on the outside, and you're going to thread it through your sewing awl. And what I like to do is the end with the divot, I like to point it the direction that I'm going to be going around the shoe. So I'm going to be going around the shoe like this, counterclockwise. And so I want my divot on the sewing awl to point that way. So go ahead and start threading like so. You just put it through the top of the needle. And then all you're going to do is poke the sewing awl through the next hole in the midsole, like so. And then I like to grab the slack right here, and then pull it this way, pull it away from the shoe, and pull the needle out. This will leave a loop. So now that you have your loop, you're going to take the string that's on the inside and put that string through the loop. And then you simply just take both ends on the inside and outside and just tie it down like that. So you're basically going to do that all the way around. Now, some tiny complications you might see. If you pull too hard, you'll notice that the loop will come inwards like that. Obviously, you don't want that. To fix that, you just pull the outside to close it. Same thing could happen. It could go towards, if you pull too hard on the outside, the loop could come through like that and get all messed up, like right there. All you have to do is just pull from the inside. So this is probably the most time-consuming process. You're going to go all the way around the shoe. Now, I'm just going to skip to the toe cap here to show you what to do when you get there. The toe cap is a little bit harder because when the upper is on, you're not going to be able to see the loop. You have to, finesse it a little bit more. So once you get to the toe cap, what I like to do is you're gonna poke it through like normal. And I like to try and push it through as far as I can, like that. And you're gonna have to, you know, shove your fingers in there. If you know someone with smaller hands, it might be easier to get their help. But again, you kind of gotta finesse your way in there. And once you get, you know, a grip on that thread, you're gonna do the same thing. And it's gonna be really hard to try to thread the thread through this loop when the toe box is covering it. So what I found easy to do was to just make the loop as large as possible. So I would pretty much just make the hole so that you could see it from the top of the midsole, and then you can just put your string through a lot easier and then tie it down. Now obviously I am skipping steps, so it's not going to look like that, but that's the general gist of how you do that. So once you go all the way around to tie it off, you're just going to overlap over the first stitch. So pretend like I've already stitched over. You're just going to poke it through. You're going to overlap your first stitch, poke it through, and then you're going to form that same loop again. But this time you're going to pull the thread all the way through so that both pieces are on the inside. And then you can simply just tie a knot off using the 2 strings like that. And that's pretty much how you thread the midsole. So that pretty much wraps up the sole swap process. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. Obviously, my job is not perfect. There were a few mistakes made, but in the end, it looks good enough for me, and I've already worn them out and the sole held up fine. So the imperfections I can definitely live with. If you have any questions after watching this video all the way through, definitely leave a comment down below and I will do my best to answer all of them. But until next time, I will see you on the next video.